Thank you for joining today and also for coming in on time. We will be hosting the session. My colleague Johanna Su from Artisans of Innovation. Johanna is the founding partner and principal in Artisans of Innovation, and she's a consultant in culture and creative industry. And myself, Ruba Saleh, I'm the project manager of C-Ship Cultural Entrepreneurship at ISHEC Brussels Management School. So welcome again. Today's webinar aims to raise awareness and disseminate knowledge about best practices in cross-sector collaboration between artists, business, and industry. And it is actually titled Art and Corporate World as Drivers of Reciprocal Mindset Change. Before we start, I would like to dedicate a quick moment for housekeeping. We have muted everyone by default, so we won't be disrupted by latecomers. However, when you wish to talk, please click the microphone icon to mute or unmute yourself. Please note that the webinar will be recorded, so please feel free to keep your camera on or off. And you are always welcome to use the chat box throughout. The last 20 minutes of the webinar will be dedicated to Q&As. I will start by giving you a brief overview of C-Ship and Artisans of Innovation, and then I will introduce our three bright speakers and give the floor then to our first speaker. So without further ado, I will start sharing my screen. Okay. So C-Ship, or Cultural Entrepreneurship, is an intensive entrepreneurial training program designed for professionals in the cultural and creative industries. It was designed in 2021 under the framework of the International Year of Creative Economy for Sustainable Development. And it is actually designed to guide cultural and creative industry professionals and or aspirants to start and launch their entrepreneurial journey, ensure the financial viability of their projects, develop and or strengthen their management skills, and maximize their societal contribution and positive impacts. Artisans of Innovation is an innovation consultancy partnership driven by passion for the creative economy and its capability to drive forward innovations and create transformative and disruptive impact. Last year, Artisans of Innovation, based on an inquiry, they launched a study which tackled topics such as how can artists and designers play an effective role in the corporate innovation process, with a drive for more and better innovation high on the agenda of many companies. Why don't they seek contribution from artists and designers? Why isn't this practice more established? And is there insufficient empirical evidence and a lack of case studies that demonstrate the impact of such collaboration? The output of this study is titled Artists, Designers, and Business in Cross-Sector Collaboration, Untapped Potential for Systemic Change. The conclusions and recommendations from this study fit into the creation of this webinar and the upcoming one. So I would like to start by presenting our three bright speakers. Our first speaker is Hugo Henry. Hugo is an actor, presenter, and entrepreneur with more than 20 years of experience in international TV, film, and theater production. Also active for many years as producer, director, screenwriter in business theater productions, with performances all over Europe and using his professional performance skills as coach in presenting and media training in very diverse domains. He speaks English, French, Dutch, German, and Italian, which always give him the opportunity to work across national frontiers. Our second speaker is Lisa Przioda. Lisa has been working for Bosch since 2015. Her role as innovation manager allows her to bridge the gap between corporate and art with Platform 12, an experimental space where researchers and artists can inspire each other and whose aim to break down conventional structures and promote creativity. Last but not least, I would like to present Dr. Tom Fleming, who is a leading international authority on the creative economy, arts and cultural policy, and creative cities and regions. His work focuses on advising governments, municipalities, and institutions across the world to develop effective research, policy, strategy, and action across the creative economy. Tom has led strategic research projects in every region with a portfolio of projects stretching close to 20 years. Clients include the World Bank, UNESCO, European Commission, British Council, arts councils, multiple governments, municipalities, cultural and educational organizations, and NGOs. I would like to give a warm welcome to all our participants and our speakers, and I would like to give the floor to Hugo to welcome and give the floor to Hugo Henry.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Hugo, you will be speaking to us today about an actor's entrepreneurial journey in the business theater. Could you please tell us more about who you are artistically speaking and what do you do as an artist in companies?
So thank you very much for the invitation and thank you very much for the very nice introduction. Very briefly, first of all, my function in the artistic world, I work as an actor, I work as a director, a scenarist and a producer. You see here two pictures. In fact, I like the right one because we're going to talk about it. You see an actor, but maybe you see a businessman. And it's interesting to have to find really the links and the efficient way of working together between corporate domain and cultural domain. On the left side, it's still confidential, but it's a new serial I'm on. It's in France. It's just a pilot that we've been working on. I've done a lot of theater, a lot of television, a lot of things. All that you can find it back on hugohenry.actor, Henry with Y, and you can see all these things. But today, why are we here today? You know, more for the because of the picture on the right. At a certain moment in my life, I realized that I didn't want to be just an actor on stage and in the spotlight. And that is very nice, but at a certain moment I realized you can do much more with acting and theatrical tools. And when I was 14, I was lucky to have parents who gave me a book for my birthday of Bertolt Brecht. In Germany they know him very well, but I think all over the world he's known very well. I don't consider that I'm Bertolt Brecht, not at all, but I understood that as an actor with theater you can do other things. You can transmit messages in very different ways. And in fact, I started to do this little by little. I did a presentation and I played some characters, and more I developed it myself. And in fact, what exactly is business theater? In fact, it's transmitting a message. It can be a rational message. Sometimes it's more an emotional message. I will immediately give an example. Doctors, they go to university, they work in hospitals, etc., and they learn things. And they learn at a certain moment how to transmit a difficult message, how to transmit a message to somebody by saying, okay, you're terminal. You're just not going to live very long anymore. Technically, medically, it's very easy. You have the dossiers, you have everything, but there are always human beings behind it. So we're talking about emotional intelligence. And that's mainly what business theater is all about. Now, we use a lot of course, examples, even a lot of humor, not with all the content it's possible. The example I just gave, well, it's a little bit more difficult. But for 8 years, just we had to stop before COVID, I had a production which was running for 8 years with somebody who survived cancer. He was an actor before, and he survived. Okay, but there's a lot of damage. I'm not going to go into his medical dossier, but he's in a wheelchair, etc. But at a certain moment, we played his story, and he wanted it to be as a stand-up comedian because he said all the things that didn't work out in the hospitals, and it's not only criticism. I want to do this as a comedy, and we went to the companies and we went everywhere. And for 8 years, everything was full booked. They booked already for the next year because later on there were debates. So the point is, what happened there was not only a rational message, there was an emotional message thanks to the theatrical tools. In fact, it's as simple as that. I tried to make it as simple as that because sometimes, well, between the cultural domain and the corporate domain, it's not so easy to think that you can work together. Everybody can learn from everybody. So the challenge there all the time is communication. What is the point of view? What is the strategy? What do you want in a company? People who are wanting to watch a business theater are not the same people as the one who's going to a cultural presentation in theater. So the objective is completely different, and that's the reason why we talk to the companies, and really communication is very important, that the follow-up is very important too. And sometimes we work also with role-playing. Role-playing, for the people who know role-playing, it's not just playing a role, an actor playing a role just to test some things. In fact, the actor is doing absolutely nothing, he's just reacting. And there are different learning points. You can do this with 30 people, you can do this with 4 people. You see, with the theatrical tools, you can do a lot of things on the long term with companies. So I can give you, of course, a lot of other examples, but generally it is about emotional intelligence. So being intelligent with emotions. Everybody's emotional, but how do you treat them in corporate? You can treat them in private life, that's something different, but in a corporate environment, how do you treat them? And as I said, humor is very important, and I think we're going to see the next picture where we can see some humoristic. No, okay, this is when I worked as a presenter, as I said, of different television channels. So this is just one picture, an example. We worked in the medical environments, also in the pharma environment, because it was going about health, and sport is great. And of course, you need some medication sometimes. In fact, it's a whole puzzle. And the sensibilization of the culture of writing a lot of medication, or trying to put everything under nutrition. Well, it's not always so easy to explain. And we made, very simply, a lot of scenes, a business theater, about what the people, the patients, can be feeling. And we talked also, of course, about how the doctors can be feeling. I can't tell too much because it's confidential. Again, I'm very sorry. But for example, the placebo, at a certain moment, the doctor is gonna, have a description for a placebo. There is a reason for that. So you can say, yeah, but it's stupid because it doesn't work, it doesn't help. Yes, it does, because it's a whole puzzle. And therefore, well, you see the picture, we work with a lot of humor. Okay, what are some difficulties in all the years that I've been working all over Europe, from north to south, from Oslo to Lisbon, for a lot of companies. And in fact, it was generally not difficult. It was interesting to work with different cultures of organizations or companies. But the communication part was so essential, because some people don't understand. Look at this picture and you can say, well, what are you going to say? What are you going to do there? You're going to talk about doctors and how they get to treat certain things and change their mind or whatever. This is not theater, you see? So that everybody's on the same level concerning what the objective is. And the objective is, of course, for human reasons, to change things, to change ideas, to make it easier for people. As is the example that I gave for doctors, okay, they studied for it, they have to transmit this message, but make it easy for them as human beings to work with people who are terminal. You see, these are the objectives. And therefore, that's what I was talking about, the challenge is the communication, that people understand each other. Corporate can learn from culture, and culture can learn from corporate. So, in fact, the challenge also for artists, why, you could say, well, why don't we see more artists in this environment? Yeah, it's a pity, because they can transmit a lot of things. And it's important to know that, in fact, I worked in a certain moment in television studios, and I was really there. I had, in fact, a limited contract, an exclusive contract. I couldn't do anything else. And I was like on another planet. And once afterwards, I started working with business theater. Well, I was very happy to come, and I will use these words, in the real world. That means people who are not artists. I'm not against artists, I'm an artist myself. But I mean, at a certain moment, you see a lot of things happening in his life. And it was even at that moment when I talked to people in different departments and domains, the banking, I work for NATO Shape, European Community. So you meet a lot of people. And as an actor, already that is research in the positive way, that you learn a lot, you observe a lot from other people. And in the other way around, well, it's important to know that, well, theatrical tools, even in presentation skills. So sometimes I give coaching in presentation skills. And it's not just, okay, yeah, I have to say this and that, but it's mentally, it's a mindset. And therefore, the actor can help. You see, it's trying to find the balance. And, well, yes? I'm sorry? Oh, I think somebody said something. What I just want to say, I can give, well, other examples. There's so many examples at a certain moment. We work also with technical tools like the voting system, where the people, for example, the 500 people in the audience, and then we play 3 scenes, and they say, okay, A, B, or C. What does the manager got to do? First of all, okay, we talk to the company, of course, what is the real objective? Then I write a scenario, or somebody else will do it. It got to be validated, and then we rehearse, and then we have a last repetition for the client, and then we have the performance. Sometimes we have 1 performance, so we'll do all this work just for 1 performance. That's right. Sometimes we have 40 performances in 2 weeks, so I had to have different teams. Sometimes there was 1 performance, a business theater, where I worked 5 years long with the same company, and that's when we traveled all over Europe. So, last but not least, I'd like to say to all the people who have artistic talents, please don't hesitate to get in contact with corporates, because it's interesting to work together. And sometimes, and that's a little bit, I don't want to be negative, but sometimes the people who say, actors, and saying, well, I have no work, I can't make this production because I'm not subsidized by government, but that's not important. There's a lot of more things to do over the frontiers. If you're a professional actor and you can do a lot of things, voilà, if you're multilingual, je parle très bien français, ik spreek Duits, als je in Duitsland arbeidt, io parlo italiano, non è veramente difficile, l'italiano pure francese, ik spreek ook Nederlands. What I mean is, please go over the borders, not only literally, but looking, okay, what is corporate doing? What are the strategies? What are the objectives of people, of CEOs in companies, etc. And there's a lot of work there waiting for you. And I hope, really, thank you very much now for your attention. I really hope to continue to work with corporates as much as possible to change the world for a better. Thank you very much. Oh yes, there's the last one. Oh, no, last picture. It's a little bit more entertainment, but in fact it was also a kind of team building in a company. There was a fusion, and in fact it's very simple. They said, we're going to do something funny, but all the time, of course, I transmitted messages as the fool, because the fool, he can tell everything you want, and of course anecdotes, anything you want. It was a great night, 2.5 hours with dinner and with knights and with horses and all the thing. But it was more than just entertainment. It was sensibilization, just very simply to make sure that everybody understands. Yes, it's not going to be easy. Okay, everybody's having this culture, but we're going to do this together. So that was the last picture indeed. Thank you very much, Ruba.
Thank you very much, actually, Hugo, for this brilliant reflection and sharing great insights from your own experience. You brought upon the idea of the business theater, where you have used the emotional intelligence and many critical tools and methodologies based case, of course. You also mentioned the challenges related to communication, the different working with different corporate culture, and a difficulty also from the artistic perspective on the need of being coached on how to interact, but also how to gain some presentation skills needed for the sector. And you ended up your presentation with this beautiful action, call for action for artists to cross the border, to change their mental ceilings, and to try to understand strategies and objectives of corporate and how to translate them and communicate them to a larger public. Thank you very much again for this inspiring presentation. I would like now to give the floor to Lisa Przioda, who will elaborate on Bosch Platform 12 Campus, and she will explain and elaborate more on motivations, experience, and conclusions on collaboration with artists. Lisa, the floor is yours. I don't think Lisa is hearing us. Maybe she's freezing.
No. Yes.
Okay. So Johanna and Tom, maybe if you agree, we move to the conversation, and then whenever Lisa joins again, I can invite her to make her presentation. So Johanna and Tom, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you, Ruba. Yes. So great to hear, of course, from an actor's artist perspective. And we will then also hear more from a corporate, more business perspective. And I think that it is now extremely relevant to, and very, very grateful to have you, Tom, with us. It will be very interesting to hear your perspectives, having worked with and for, from policy perspective on this. I know that in 2015 you did work on analysis and review called Culture and Creative Spillovers in Europe, a report on a preliminary evidence review for the European Research Partnership on Culture and Creative Spillovers. Could you say something first about spillover effect, explain a couple of words about what that is and your conclusions in that regard, how that fits in and why it's important in creative economy development, and how do you see this practice of creative crossover, so not necessarily only between artists, designers and corporates, but also in other ways. How do you see that in relation to spillovers?
Sure, no problem. And it's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon. Thanks for the invitation. It feels so long ago, 2015, for lots of different reasons. Obviously, it is quite a long time ago anyway, but lots of things have happened. And also, I think the language has changed, and the both intellectual and strategic paradigm for understanding the role and impact of artists, of creatives, of creativity more general, and of creative practice has changed quite considerably. I think the work back in 2015, it was really a first attempt to build a compendium of knowledge about which brought together research on the role and impact of artists and creative practice in a wider society, not just in terms of their links to a wider economy. It was a way of trying to create a different kind of language that didn't talk solely in terms of impact, but talked about relationships, interrelationships, and interdependencies, and try to put the artist or the creative practitioner to the center of the discussion, or as a focal point for understanding those interrelationships, rather than, as is often the case, or historically was the case, the artists or the creatives would be to the side or to the edges. And when you put them to the edges, then a direct consequence of that is that they're seen as a nice to have, or the thing you do as an afterthought, or the thing you might bring in if you have some extra resource. But we wanted to unpack that a bit and actually refocus and reframe and understand those interrelationships from a creative perspective. And very broadly, the research identified a kind of typology of spillovers. One was around what we call knowledge spillovers. And crudely, this is about building collaborative, co-created knowledge through dialogue, through collaborative practice, through testing, through crossing boundaries to develop new work, artists working to pick up and play with and shape the use of technologies, artists working with health professionals, artists working in corporate environments, to understand how knowledge is exchanged, to understand how new knowledge is created through that process of exchange, and to understand therefore broadly what a spillover effect might be through putting artists and creatives to the center of that process of exchange. And then the second kind of spillover we talked about was much more about place-based or tangible cluster-driven impact. So the role of creative firms or creative practitioners working within clusters of other industries. So that took us into discussions around, for example, the role of arts in science, the way that artists and technologists can work together to create different kinds of knowledge clusters, and the influence that has on cities in particular, and on place-based creative industries development, where I guess the classic model still is to try to co-locate creatives, in artist studios, creative districts, cultural quarters, those sorts of things. But actually that can sometimes serve to kind of ghettoize the artists, again, putting them to the edge or putting them in a certain place. But when you look at a different kind of spatiality based on interrelationships in situ, so having in transsectoral or transdisciplinary clusters of activity, often anchored by universities, which are increasingly working in that space, then you start to shape a different kind of exchange, a different kind of spillover, where you have a kind of almost a convergence of different skill sets, different ways of working and seeing, which in turn create a different kind of knowledge and a different kind of economy, and can spark and drive innovation in fresh and dynamic ways. I think this raises interesting questions for the future in terms of policy. For example, in the way you might want to facilitate connections across the boundaries of sectors which historically were underconnected, to create new clusters of knowledge development and exchange to drive innovation. It was ages ago, and I can talk in a minute perhaps about what we've learned since, and perhaps where we're going in terms of the role and positioning of culture and creative practice in a wider system.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And so in one sense, you could say that this kind of practice, creative crossovers and artists and designers collaborating, working within corporate and business context, these are in some way a way of creating then these spillovers. And can I ask you, what is your experience when you have worked for and with public authorities and policymakers? How do you feel that they relate to this topic? How and you know, if not, why do you think that is? What has it looked like in your different cases?
I think there's a gap between the rhetoric and the practice, or between the recognition that there's something in this, that there's something exciting, and actually the development of practical interventions underpinned by real investment. I think that policymakers broadly, you know, are quite happy to talk about innovation and creativity, and obviously these are quite easy things to talk about. No one wants to say how uncreative they are or how uninnovative they are. But when it comes to unpacking how you leverage your distinctive strengths and build something that is genuinely going to affect system change in terms of how knowledge is created, how new products and services are generated, and how you can create that extra value through interrelationships that need to be carefully brokered and supported, then that's another thing together. I think we've got lost a little bit as well in terms of some of the definitional challenges, you know, things like the notion of the creative economy, which means everything and nothing at the same time. So then people get lost in terms of wayfinding, turning something like that into something practical. But we are starting to see significant change. I think one of them is that the digital shift has accelerated the innovation capacity of every sector, or maybe it's just required new ways of working. And the arts and cultural sector is often, you know, quite a privileged position because it's all about looking around the corner, about experimenting, about risk taking, and digitalization in different ways has put those creatives in quite a strong position to be a bit of a pathfinder for other sectors. I think we're also, perhaps as a consequence somewhat of the digital shift and what that means across the value chain for all sectors, we're seeing a convergence of practice, and we're seeing in some ways the kind of death of the sector as we used to see it, you know, both within the creative industries like music, fashion, film, design, etc., but also across the wider knowledge economy. So that creates an impulse for collaboration. And policymakers are starting to recognise that if you are to build an innovation ecosystem, let's say, then you need to be intersectoral or interdisciplinary. You need to facilitate networks across different sectors, and you need to nurture mission-driven or impact-facing activities where people can cluster around a problem or an opportunity, be that a health challenge or a challenge around climate crisis or a challenge around enhancing public space or whatever it may be. And when you have those kinds of challenge-facing or impact-facing agendas at an urban level, for example, you start to see change. We're also seeing a shift, I think, in terms of education and particularly in terms of research and development within the higher education sector, which is increasingly looking at universities as kind of anchors of civic renewal, but also as catalysts of industrial change. And if they're readying their future work, if they're readying their students to be able to play a role in the future economy, then that requires them to give them skill sets in terms of entrepreneurship, management, digital literacy, and an ability to collaborate across boundaries. So that's starting to input into the wider creative economy or innovation ecosystem. So there's a kind of education policy strand to this as well. And then finally, just in terms of investment and funding, I think we're starting to see much more tailored investment programs that facilitate research and development in terms of boundary crossing practice that often have arts and creatives in the mix. For some of the reasons I talked about, not least their ability to kind of look around the corner and help to shape and define the future and ask difficult questions. So we're starting to see policy shifts, but there's still a big gap between people saying this is a good thing and it must happen, and actually delivering on it. And it'll be interesting to see how for example, the KIC, the European Creative Knowledge, what's the acronym stand for? The KIC, the Creative Industries KIC. Let's just call it that. It'll be interesting to see how that manoeuvres us into a new opportunity landscape in terms of the role that artists and creatives can have for the rest of the economy.
Great. So you mentioned already then a couple of potential challenges, because my next question was about challenges, and so to the difficulty to succeed in working interdisciplinary, of course, in order to advance on this practice. And you were talking as well about that this to advance this practice, it has to be carefully brokered. Could you say something more about that, maybe about challenges, and how should we then broker this? What is the ideal scenario for brokering this and going forward, you think? Well, maybe on a local, national, international level.
Okay, I think the first challenge is around thinking around the talent base as this resource for interdisciplinary practice, or the facilitation of spillovers. While there are loads and loads of incredibly talented artists, creative practitioners, and people working in other sectors, there aren't enough people who have those crossover skill sets. And if you're talking about, for example, artists working in a corporate environment, if we're talking about artists working at the sharp end of digital transformation, artists working in health settings, care settings, artists working for environmental challenges, for every example of best practice, there are thousands of examples of bad practice, or people who haven't got the skill sets to be able to operate in those kinds of environments. That's not the fault of the artist or the creative practitioner. That's an outcome of the education they've received and the support they've been provided with since their education. So we need to upskill. We need to build literacy, fluency to be able to work in those different environments. And it works both ways. Similarly with the other sectors, they need to be able to build literacy and fluency to understand the role, the kind of practice, and the possibilities that artists and creating the table. And obviously, sometimes that's about negotiations. That needs to be facilitated sensitively, and it's about power as well. We need to think about ethical ways of brokering this, and we need to think about ways of supporting the integrity of the artists so that their issues around exploitation, for example, are managed. So that's the first thing, which is a kind of global challenge, and I could go on about that forever. A second issue is that I don't think we have a deficit of evidence. We have a deficit of systems solutions, because there are millions of case studies, and we can all reference different case studies. But for each one, you can say, well, that's not quite the same as here. There's a kind of that's fine for them, but what about this kind of response? Culturally specific, different challenge, different context, etc. So what we need to develop is our structures, frameworks, tools that are applicable across different environments that can then be adapted and developed in different contexts. So that's where I think the biggest evidence gap is. And one of the ways to do that is by, again, kind of co-investing across boundaries, universities, corporates, and creatives working together to co-define those systems or develop those frameworks. So there's a couple of examples. Evidence, yes, but certain kinds of evidence and talent development.
Perfect, great. And thinking about this practice today and comparing a bit to what happened years ago, maybe 10 years ago, we also had this discussion the other day. There are several among us who seem to think that there was more happening some years ago and there was some kind of slowdown. What do you think about this? Is there any traction today for this practice? Is it more than 10 years ago?
Yeah, sorry. I don't know if it's your Wi-Fi or my Wi-Fi that's making it a bit wobbly, but I think I got the question. I think that we're seeing much more strategic focus on the role and impact of the arts and cultural and creative sector across, not just across the economy, but across society. And I think this links to a reframing of the value proposition overall of arts and culture in society, and also a rethink about what a successful economy is founded upon and what it looks like. And this, I think, has been brought into sharp focus through the pandemic and subsequent crises as well. And it is also linked to notions around well-being, a well-being economy, which is emotionally more at ease and more productive than an economy driven purely for the pursuit of generating profit. And I think this is where we're starting to see things shaped rather differently. It links to the Sustainable Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Agenda broadly, and the role that the cultural sector can have as a pillar for sustainable development, and the role that the cultural sector can have to respond to global challenges, and also to enhance, as a society, our well-being, our sense of pride in place. It can link to our notions around cohesion. It can deliver those sorts of socially driven spillover effects, to go back to that phrase. I think we're starting to see greater recognition of that. The trouble is still, we have a consensus around that in many countries, but still an inability to convert that into policy and investment. And this is where, and in some ways, therefore, we are where we were 10 years ago. The language has moved on, the consensus has broadened, deepened, but the policy responses are still inadequate. And we need to go a little bit beyond the perpetual pilot projects that we have towards more systemic approaches that model a future economy underpinned by innovation with creatives and artists at the very core. That's what I think we need to go to, but we've moved up the slippery mountain a bit, but we're a long way from the summit.
Great, thank you so much. Do we have another minute, Ruba, or are we out of the time? What time is it? 4:41.
I think time is up, so
yeah.
maybe we can leave some questions to the Q&A session.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Tom. It was really interesting to hear you. All of these different questions among the past, where we have moved, and how this practice fits into the spillovers, and that it's, it is a kind of spillover, or a practice that generates spillovers. It was interesting to hear about how you think that, it's attention is really needed to carefully broker this kind of practice and to work interdisciplinary. It was also very interesting, and I completely agree with you in the end, that there is maybe another kind of momentum for this practice to take some force, or to gain some force, and today, due to the post-COVID situation and also the Sustainable Development Agenda. So thank you very much for all of the other interesting points that you had.
Pleasure.
I would like to join Johanna actually in thanking you, Tom. It was really interesting to see how the language and paradigm changed in the last decade, and how we're speaking more and more about relationships, interrelationships, and interdependency, while the public policy discourse is a little bit talkative, but still lacking behind in terms of implementation. It was interesting to see how you also stress out some potential future development or supporting arguments in terms of the digital shift and universities as hotbeds of industrial change, and what's happening in terms of tailored investment programs. I actually shared the link of the KIC. And what was also very interesting is the fact that CCIs reflecting on the COVID crisis are providing a more strategic impact for the entire society by revisiting their value proposition, targeting the societal needs, and focusing on the well-being economy. I actually shared in terms of skills development, what's happening in terms of Pact for Skills at the EU level, in terms of promoting partnerships and skills in cultural and creative industries in different domains. And this brings me to our next speaker, Lisa. I can see that you're back now. We would like to learn more about some of these skills, especially the skills of interaction and cross collaboration with scientists and business people at Bosch. So please, we are all ears. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Also very sorry for, I guess I've never experienced a bad timing as just happened with my internet connection, but Tom, thank you very much for stepping in so spontaneously. Yeah, like it was introduced, I want to share some insights from the company's perspective, or a corporate perspective. And what we did, we had a program evolving around a creative area. It's called Platform 12. And in the next minutes, I want to share what we've done there. Just to give you briefly an overview what the company I work for, Bosch, is doing. We're active in mobility solutions, also energy and building technology, industrial technology, and consumer goods. So when I talk about our research department, they're all tackling all these kinds of topics. It's quite a diverse team we have on site. All over the world, we have around 400,000 employees, so quite a diverse company. So, but I wanted to bring you this specific topic of our location, which is located in southern Germany. The purpose of building this campus was because our research facilities were kind of like spread all over the place in southern Germany, and they created this campus with the purpose of bringing together those disciplines and to create synergies. And our innovation department, of which I'm part of, it was asked in the beginning of 2014 to create a creative space where researchers could come up with creative ideas, where ideation would be facilitated. And this creative space is located in the most upper floor of the main building. I'm not sure if I can have a laser pointer, but you can imagine it's right next to the Bosch claim. So the whole area, it's a 500 square meter area, which is reserved specifically for ideation and creativity. So this is kind of like how it looks. It's like I said, a vast space. All its interior can be shifted around. It's quite flexible. It has all kinds of material for prototyping, for crafting, and it's a space where the researchers can come anytime. So it's a meeting place. It supports serendipity, right? You come there, you don't know who there is, what's been developed there, so you can come in contact spontaneously. So like I said, I would say what's the purpose of this place is idea generation and visualization of new ideas. And in the way we shaped it, it's also supporting the inspirational process, reflection on questions and ideas, even beyond what the researchers are working on right now. And also allows for experimenting outside of the known areas of expertise. And I think this is also where we brought in this artist perspective. So this whole area was designed by artists, and they also brought in the idea of having a fellowship. So this fellowship we started in early 2015, and it actually ran for 5 years. So what I'm presenting to you today is kind of like a retrospective, because the program ended in 2020 with the upcoming of the pandemic. But I think it's worth sharing what we experienced here. And throughout this 5-year period, we had 18 artists running through the program, and each artist stayed with us for 3 or 4 months. And I would say they kind of like, they acted as indirect observers and instigators from outside, and they kind of like mirrored what was happening within the company. And this kind of confrontation that was happening between artists and researchers, I think it was the most interesting part was this unfamiliar approaches of work, the differences of content they were working on, but also the ways of thinking. And when I think of what was the motivation why we did this, is actually the process within, not necessarily the aim to reach a certain ending product. Because Tom was also talking about this learning process and kind of like how we can train also in the beginning in our education system, how we act with different, or how we deal with different disciplines, how we can encounter and incorporate this knowledge. And I think we kind of like wanted to shape this kind of innovation culture again. Obviously, we're doing this with adults, so it's not that easy to bring in this new perspective, but this is what we aim for with this project. So really to foster the innovation culture, to create synergies out of creativity and ingenuity. So I brought here some aspects on the artist motivation as well. So for them, it was quite interesting to have this interdisciplinary examination of their own field of interest and to see it from the corporate side. Obviously, they got in contact with experts from different domains. Like I said before, Bosch is invested in all kinds of different fields. And so the researchers on site, we have every kind of backgrounds. It may be mathematics, artificial intelligence, physics. So there's just a lot of knowledge around. And also for them, it was interesting to see aspects from a company perspective and to gain access to technologies. Technologies in a way of understanding what kind of research areas there are and how they are tackled, but also how this technology can be used for their artistic practice. And I brought a quote here, which I thought was quite interesting, from Kinga Todt. She said, "I think innovation is like falling out of patterns, falling out of the schematics. It also means to be able to ask questions, and I was the question mark itself." So I think it kind of like brings together like what we aim for with this project and how she really understood why she was there. We asked for feedback, and this is why I put down here the resources. We had a researcher kind of like helping us with kind of like the assessment of like after 5 years, what was the outcome of our project, and this can be found under this link. So it's an official research paper that has been published, doing interviews and stuff like that. So from this research paper, I also took some of the insights. So the artist said it was an enriching, overall positive learning experience, but it was challenging to do this in this new environment because as a company, it's not a theater and it's not a museum, right? It's just an environment that is not really prepared to receive art, to discuss art, and the researchers were not always leveled with the understanding of why, what does it have to do with my kind of work. So there's a lot of communication that needs to be happening, a lot of mediating. And since it was a learning process for us as a company as well, that was a challenging experience. But they also said it triggered their self-reflection on the profession that they chose, being an artist. Like it helped them reevaluate, why am I doing this? And I think it was Tom who also mentioned this perspective on being. I think I lost my train of thought here, but I'll come to it later. Then what's also important, the artistic freedom. Like you cannot put boundaries to what has to be the result of this. I think it's important in this process to give this artistic freedom, and all our artists, they said it was valued, and we provided that for them. And then most of them said the 3 months or 4 months period of time was quite too short. We actually thought it's a nice short period of time for them just to step in, and then we would have a nice change for the 3 to 4 perspectives per year. But we found that the longer the period, the easier it is for them to really understand the environment and become more active and more confident in acting in that environment. But I think what's most interesting is also what happened on our company side. So our employees said it was also refreshing and inspiring disruption of their daily routines. It was highly appreciated. Also because like researchers, sometimes they even think the same as artists, right? They're curious, they want to know new things, they get their ideas from all kinds of inspiration. So that was a highly appreciated impulse that we're setting here. The effects that we found were on the cognitive level. So everything the researchers answered, we could see that it was content related to intensified reflectional processes. The interaction with the artists helped them to give more context to whatever they were working on. It helped with the sense making of why am I doing this and what does it have to do with the future, for example, and also processes of divergent thinking. What I thought was interesting, most of our researchers said it's not necessarily the art project that helped them getting into those cognitive levels and cognitive effects, but it was the nature of the personality of the artist that came to us. It was the person who thought different, who acted different, and who engaged them into either joint projects or conversations or anything like that. But it was more that personality, but the art project itself, which I thought was a really interesting insight. So the impact, to sum it up, is more on the personal level, and I perceived it as like the purpose of our project was to foster innovation culture, and this is what I think was served with having this fellowship for 5 years. But when you ask of how many ideas were created out of this, how many products did we bring to market, then we didn't find any evidence in those terms. And I think our project was not set in that way to actually produce that. So I'm totally fine with it. But and I will just come to that in a little bit about the challenges about this. Because I think having a program like this simply for the purpose of fostering innovation culture itself, and it goes directly also with giving trust and giving freedom. And with giving freedom, you cannot come later and say, okay, what happened there, right? You cannot just measure right after. It's kind of like counterproductive. Yeah. So on my last slide, I just wanted to highlight some of the challenges and important conditions from our point of view. So I think for a corporate, it's important to have the commitment of upper management in the company. Without them, or at least the direct line of command, they should be happy and fine and even engaged in an activity like this. Also, there's a certain setup and structures of implementation that needs rethinking. So, for example, how are the researchers able to find time to actually contact an artist to spend time? Let's say they talk to each other for an hour. Will their line manager later be saying, okay, what did you do in that hour? You could have done something else for me in this time. So I think when getting into contact with a fellowship like this, as a company, you need to rethink, how is this incorporated in our structures? Is it allowed to take this time? Is it even appreciated to take this time? And is it prepared well enough? You cannot just bring an artist in and expect it will work right away. So I think this is what I experienced throughout my time as a mediator in this intersection, that this was quite the challenge to manage. I also think trust is important in this intersection, and also to create a mindset where it's an equal playing field, where each side has the same rights and expectations, and those expectations are managed in the beginning. So there won't be no hard feelings in the end, and you have to have an open process about this throughout the whole fellowship. I mentioned this before, the length of the interaction. I think it's crucial. If it's too short, they won't have the confidence and won't feel comfortable in this environment. And if it's too long, they might get assimilated too much. So I think you don't want that either, or maybe you do, but it's just something to really think about. So our Platform 12 approach was supported by external partners. They were experienced in organizing artist fellowships, and I think that was quite important to give the artist also an experienced partner on the other side of the company. And me, myself, I was doing this mediator role, as I explained, and I think that was important for them to navigate around this difficult environment of a corporation, because there are lots of things to take into account, like security and safety and all kinds of things, or communication within the company, and you can just not leave this up to the artists. They don't know where and what kind of environment they are, and it needs someone navigating that area. Then I think funding, just to think about, is there housing support, are there material costs? So these are just things that come along with the fellowship that needs to be organized in the beginning. Then this topic of ownership and intellectual property. It seems simple, but for a company, they may want to have a claim on whatever's been developed. And I think that's why I said you need to organize an equal playing field to discuss in the beginning, okay, if something is created out of this, who gets the rights on what? So I think it just serves a lot of, you can save a lot of trouble if you organize those contracts or whatever in the beginning, and everybody knows what they're in for. And then, like I said, I think with this kind of still kind of like newish encounters, it's still important to have this openness of outcome, because in between the process, something new may arise that you have not thought about in the beginning. So I think this whole process should always contribute to this openness and new ideas that may arise throughout the process. And I think it was mentioned also by Tom or Hugo before that communication is important, and also the documentation process. So how do we communicate this also to partners, to media, to politicians? We kind of like thought about this later in the stage. So we kind of like ran sometimes into trouble on how we could do this. So this is a learning, I guess, we had. And then Tom was, I think, touching on that, the definition measuring of success, or how profit is generated. So I think this kind of like goes directly into each other. If you encounter a company that has totally different values and ethics and development processes, you won't have success in combining their processes with the processes of an artist and how they work. So this is just what I encountered. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the discussion. And like I said, we did start a little later, but we did start with documenting the artist projects. There was no time to show any of them today, but if you feel like dropping by, those are like 2 to 3 minute videos. We have them all stored on the Vimeo platform. I can share the link in the chat if you like. So thank you very much. Looking forward to your questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, Lisa. This was very inspiring, and actually it completes the vision of the 3 roles of the artists, the policy side, research and policy side, and finally corporate. It was really very inspiring to listen to your experience and implementation of this dialogue space, which was designed by artists in order to create a kind of interaction between research, art, and business. You called it also a learning space on how to deal with different disciplines in order to foster the innovation culture. You also shared the feedback, first of all, the motivation of artists to join such a facility, but also what was their feedback about this enriching learning experience. I found it really very interesting to learn also about the feedback of your own employees, about what was the impact on their personal lives, but also on their professional life. And even more interesting to see from a corporate perspective that it was okay to have fewer evidence of contributions and to leaving the space for artistic freedom and cross-fertilization. And finally, of course, you share different challenges, which are very, very interesting. And I'm sure we have plenty of questions from our participants. So if you all agree, I would like to open space for Q&As. And Johanna, I wonder whether you would like to maybe start by posing some questions.
Yeah, sorry, my mic is on. Yes, of course. So I was just wondering, going back to this idea about how this practice is carefully brokered and facilitated, maybe it's maybe a question to all of you 3 speakers. Have you been brought together, with professionals from other sectors than from you in a company with artists or culture creative professionals, or as an artist with the business, corporate or industry sector, for example, and also then, of course, with policymakers? Has that happened in the past? And if yes, how was that? How was that brought forward, and what were the results? And if not, why do you think, or how can we make that happen? So not really, it seems.
Well, from my point of view, there was this urge to keep this project running, even though we decided in 2020, because of the pandemic, to stop it. And I'm still in contact with our Akademie Schloss Solitude, which is the partner I talked about, that they're offering artistic fellowships internationally. And so I'm still navigating with them. And they actually fought for some more governmental money and funding on a project like this. And Bosch is kind of like acting as a silent partner or silent how do you say, like a reviewer on the process. So I'm still, yeah, I'm trying to keep the connection and wait for a time and an idea on where we can come together again, because I think this timing needs to be carefully managed. Like I said, it's important to have your management on board, and I think it's important to pick a time and an idea for the collaboration that will actually be successful in pitching to my management.
Yeah, could I just jump in actually on that? Because I guess I'm in a slightly different position in that a lot of our work is around either facilitating interactions and partnerships across different sectors, or it's around understanding the extent to which there is an ecosystem of collaboration across different sectors, obviously often focusing mostly on the arts and creative industries. And I want to really echo something that Lisa said earlier on, which is that a lot of the value, I think, seems to come much more through the interpersonal and the community building. And I think that does, from evaluations we've undertaken, that does tend to stick in terms of a range of outcomes, for example, around confidence, around validation of artistic practice or creative practice, around the sense of shared purpose. You know, I think these kinds of areas are really important. They're not necessarily so tangible, you know, in terms of new products, new services, but I think in terms of readying the workforce to be in a position to generate those kinds of more tangible outcomes, these kinds of interventions are really key. And getting that balance right between a kind of more robust type of brokerage and something that is more gentle and facilitating, I think, is really important as well. You can't force collaboration, but you can provide the enabling conditions for it to happen. And the kind of space that Lisa described, and there are lots of other kind of co-creation hubs and collaborative environments. I mean, that's really key. I think some of the kind of ethics of practice and around sharing ideas and telling people what you're doing. There's a studio called the Pervasive Media Studio in Bristol, where one of the rules is that you should always be interruptible. So if someone taps you on the shoulder and asks what you're doing, you can't say I'm busy. You've got to kind of go with it. That kind of thing is quite nice. And also recognizing that sometimes people just can't thrive in that environment. We can't all become great, open, collaborative players. You know, that we still need our auteurs. You know, our people, our artists who work intrinsically for the creation of art without being forced to sit there and generate value with other people or for other people. And then just one last remark. I think that there's a scale question here. So when we look at individual interventions such as a lab model, and you know, universities nowadays have knowledge exchange hubs and platforms and things like that as well. There's a question is around the extent to which those interventions, those kinds of technologies almost, because that's what they are, how do they work within a wider city or regional or national environment? So the questions around how you ensure they become kind of open and porous and rooted and connected to the wider place, how they connect with other hubs in different disciplines, other spaces of practice. And so that's where another level of facilitation comes in, the kind of connecting the centres of excellence, or the connecting the collaborative environments to create an overarching collaborative environment. And just one very tiny example, because it just reminded me of this, in the city of Aveiro in Portugal, which incidentally Bosch also has a presence, and they've been playing an active role in something called a STEAM City program, which is, you know, around science, technology, engineering, arts and maths, and trying to build relationships with micro creative firms, artists, the university, civil society organizations. And it's been a really interesting process to try to map out how collaborative environments can be nurtured at a city scale, whilst also enabling institutions to stay true to their own strategic plans. And that takes a lot of negotiation. It's always more impactful when you can lubricate the process with funding and pilot projects and things like that. And critically, and let's go back to the evidence point, evaluation is really key, not just as a kind of summative thing that says what happened, but actually having a formative theory of change approach where you start to change the model through the learning that is a process rather than an outcome. So adapting as you go is really key, rather than just waiting for things to either succeed or fail.
Great. Great, thank you so much. Yes, sorry, Hugo, go ahead.
No, very shortly, because of course I heard a lot of interesting things and similar. What Tom just was saying, that it's not always tangible when the collaboration is there between artists and corporation. It's more sometimes in the mindset, thinking out of the box. Sometimes you call it. It's very interesting. I recognize a lot of things with Lisa, of course, because I work with companies. All the things she was saying about, also communication, but the measuring. How do you measure results? Because companies want results, and that's what I just wanted to say very briefly. Well, at a certain moment, I get a professional relationship as I become a collaborator, since I work for many years for the same company, because indeed they want certain results. For example, leadership, we had Corona, how in leadership, well, how do you do this? Motivate people, etc., etc. And by using these theoretical tools, well, they realize, yes, okay, we can have another mindset, and so we can learn things easier. And that's, in fact, how we get in contact with companies, and on a long term, we have a long-term relationships. That's what I just wanted to add.
Great, thank you so much. Ruba, do you want to take a last question from the chat?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I see that there's a question posted by Suzanne. So the question is, to what extent do you feel the impact on the personal level will last? And in what ways could you stimulate it to last for a longer time?
So I think that was after my presentation, right, Suzanne? Was it kind of like in this direction?
Yeah.
So I think this impact is rather short term, to be honest. And I think I could have facilitated by keeping the network alive. For example, having like a regular meeting again to invite back the artists from past year, to have them all around for, okay, what has happened on your side, on our side, to have this exchange again. I think something like this will re-trigger some of the learning experience that our researchers would have had. We never organized something like this, but those are just ideas that obviously come across the process once you go through this. You can also help with them staying in contact. You can ask if you want to share personal data, telephone numbers, email addresses. And from my knowledge, some of the researchers are still in contact with previous artists on a personal level. So they have their LinkedIn contact, they write some emails. But this is up to them, and you ask how it can be facilitated. So I think some of the things you could do is reorganize re-meetups with everybody involved.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I see that Suzanne would like to hear also from Tom, and then we have Christian.
Okay, well, I'll just very quickly say that the magic happens when you build a community. And we know that if you think about other community settings that you may be in, be that professional or in your neighborhood or whatever, that it's about nurturing that level of trust and a sense of interdependence. And this is increasingly the paramount opportunity for nurturing impactful innovation, I think, where the creative sector can play a central role. And it's really hard because we're talking disproportionately about micro enterprises, freelancers, who are very fragile in their professions. But it's also absolutely paramount if you are going to unlock their capacity to influence systemic as well as incremental change in the economy or in the innovation system. So building communities of trust is really key.
Thank you very much, Tom. I see Christian's hand up. Christian?
Yeah, thank you. And just thank you very much, because the very inspiring contributions. I had a reflection, more a reflection maybe than really a question, about the fact that as Tom mentioned, the clusters and spillovers impact. I may think about sort of clusters of innovations as developed by Schumpeter, and the fact that it grows from sectors to sectors, and they get some critical mass coming at the end of this process. I just wonder how we can take this into consideration in a world that becomes more individualistic or individual. The fact that through the different new technologies, starting with commercial TV, and then maybe for the digital, that the fact that the experience is more a single or individual experience as far as cultural activities are concerned. And that has probably an impact also on the way that people believe in the mind, integrate culture with some economic or social insights. So this is more maybe an interrogation about the fact that if we live in a world where economic actors, I would say, are more single-minded as a demander, as a consumer of culture, but also as a producers, as producing or creating or innovating things, is it not a way to integrate also this artistic creativity with some more pragmatic, tangible, or productive creation? The fact that we don't have any more artists versus business people or artists versus producers, but basically we get all of us the two hats on our head, and that's a kind of integration, a kind of process that of course has huge implication on education, on everything. So just a reflection maybe for Tom, but maybe also for Hugo.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, sorry.
Hugo, please. Yeah.
No, very quickly. Yes, indeed. It looks like there is a controversy because you got the single-minded artist, and then you had a corporation, and you have to integrate in the corporation. If you work in a company, you have to integrate yourself. But sometimes, if you have the chance to work on a long term, there is a possibility to get on the same level concerning the objective, the strategy of the company, and then I understand. Okay, this artist is also a tool, but I mean this in the positive way. So you forget at that moment a little bit just the single-minded actor. For example, in role-playing, when we do this, as I explained it very briefly, I'm not playing anything. I'm not playing Romeo and Juliet. I'm just reacting to what you do, depending on the learning point. And so at a certain moment, I'm not that single-minded actor anymore. It's more I'm integrating in what the objective of the company is. And therefore, again, and Lisa said it very well too, communication, again, is very important so people get on the same level. Sorry, Tom, you wanted to say something?
I'm not sure I'm going to say anything remotely as profound as you both just have. I suppose it's just a reflection, really. I'm kind of both optimistic and deeply troubled at the same time by how we can nurture kind of communities of trust to facilitate, positive impact with artists and creatives at the heart, because of the points that were made around, the kind of rise of the individual and I guess the atomization of a lot of things brought through the rapid acceleration of digital technologies, and we don't even know where this is going yet when we looking at, for example, artificial intelligence and what that might bring to the party. But at the same time, I think we, almost as a response to this, are seeing a kind of greater move towards responsibility, to sharing, and the kind of Gen Z people are, that there is this kind of growth in the sharing economy, the move away from the purchase of things to the Internet of Things almost, and recognizing that there are other kinds of values, and also the acute response to climate crisis or to injustice and things like that. So I think that they were seeing really, really interesting coalitions forming around certain areas of society, which give me enormous hope. And I think artists and creatives are absolutely central there, partly because of kind of activism, whim, but also in terms of problem solving and communication and public engagement and all of those different areas that we're seeing artists playing a role in. And on another level, I think artists obviously are often early adopters of new and emerging technologies and are able to play with and to reform and adapt and hopefully make new and emergent technologies more relevant and impactful and sensitive to human needs. They can humanize the technology perhaps in ways that others can't. So on the one hand, I'm very deeply worried. On the other hand, I think there's loads of possibilities that make me more optimistic.
Thank you very much, Tom. I can see still some questions, reflections in the chat. If you all agree, maybe we can still take one question because our time is up. And I can see that Lisa already answered Robert's question, so maybe we move to Ivan's. Ivan, there's a question for Tom. Great remark. You mentioned there are a lot of procedures and negotiation. That's why I personally believe it's important to enable individuals which are not part of existing initiatives or art hubs, etc. Democratization of creative and cultural sectors and industries is great. Had to be done for integrity and transparency, but it will slow down the momentum and measurable impact. Participation is a long process.
Is that a question? I'm sorry.
I think it's a reflection for you, Tom.
Yeah. You know, and you know, I'm lucky enough to work in lots of different parts of the world. In fact, way back in 2003, 4, 5, we did some early work around creative industries in different Balkan countries, but starting in Bosnia, Herzegovina, and you know, you're right. It's a slow process because look where we are today, a long time later. I think that what's changing is that, which is helpful actually when it comes to understanding the role that arts and culture could play and the impact that the sector can have. But I think we're moving away from the purely neoliberal interpretation of the creative industries as the fastest growing sector, providing the most jobs, driving innovation, to a more subtle and impact facing one, which is around quality of place, well-being, and that kind of links to other agendas around tolerance, around diversity, inclusion, etc. So I think we're starting to see a more progressive reframing of the value proposition of arts and culture in the strategic policy narrative, which is not just about the economy. And I think that actually helps towards developing pathways for the sector in complex contexts where some of the old models, particularly that about high growth creative industries, have been slow to take off, and newer models perhaps are more embedded and can develop a different set of outcomes, whilst also celebrating the importance of arts and culture in society.
Thank you very much, Tom, for this reflection. You're leaving us with a lot of food for thought. I would like to thank all our participants, our 3 bright speakers. I would like also to thank my dear friend and colleague Johanna for this beautiful collaboration with Artisans of Innovation. A big thank you goes also to our dissemination partner G100 Arts Leadership, and I would like to thank my colleague Laure Maric, who has been taking care of all the organizational matters. Thank you very much, Laure. Just a final remark to tell all our participants that you will receive a follow-up email asking you to evaluate the webinar. Please do. And if you wish to rewatch the webinar, the recording will be available on the LinkedIn pages of C-Ship and Artisans of Innovation. Just a very quick reminder of our next webinar. Our next webinar will take place on Thursday, 16 February from 4 to 5:15, and it will touch upon the topic of art and corporate world collision or synergy. We will be hosting 3 speakers: Sandra Bauer, founding partner of Art Partner Netherlands, Professor Dr. Stephen Frost, Artistic Director of the Siemens Arts Program from Germany, and finally, Philippe Buitrago, who is the former Minister of Culture in Colombia. Thank you very much again for coming together on Teams, and we look forward to welcoming you soon again. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for hosting. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
At our webinar on the 19th of January, we proposed different perspectives on cross-sector collaborations as a creative crossovers from the corporate side, from the artist side, and also from a policy point of view. So all of these perspectives are, of course, crucial to bring the cross-sector collaboration forward. And again, we have heard success stories from, for example, the actor Hugo Henry, who also would encourage other artists to embark on entrepreneurial journeys in the corporate environment. And we heard from Lisa Przioda, Bosch Platform 12 campus, and about their open-ended processes they had 18 artists staying between 3 to 4 months in the company through stipends and fellowships to generate innovation culture. So these contributions indicate that the narrative about the practice of hybridization of artisan designers and potentially also of other creative professionals need to change within each sector, profession, community, and also across these involved parties. We agreed that there is enough evidence showing that the practice has impact, but that also it has stagnated a bit, and maybe because of several reasons. One may be that it may not have been decoded enough as much as needed, and also there may have not been enough resources to efficiently facilitate the practice in the delicate way that is needed across the sectors. So it has maybe been more easy to talk about creativity and innovation than actually do it. But the knowledge has developed since 5, 8, 10 years ago, and also more evidence has been gathered. So the question is now, if we have more momentum after COVID and also after the need of increased business model innovation for the culture sector, and also having the sustainable development agenda in mind, how to reframe the value proposition of the practice was something that Tom Fleming, creative economy expert, expressed during the webinar. And how now to grasp in reality this existing theory. How can we now transform the existing knowledge and evidence to well-working and dynamic policies? In the report of Artisans of Innovation, artists, designers, and business in cross-sector collaboration, untapped potential for systemic change, we also reflected on that, and recommendations accentuate the importance of the creation of toolkits on a practitioner level, and also of frameworks for interaction on policy and macro levels, allowing this intersectorial dialogue to happen. So this and much more we will discuss next time with Sandra Boer, an experienced professional and hardworking director of the intermediate organization, the Art Partner in the Netherlands, and Dr. Stefan Frucht, director of Siemens Corporate Art Program, and also with no one less than Felipe Buitrago, the previous Minister of Culture in Colombia, also being one of the fathers of the creative economy in this country. So see you at the same time and place on the 16th of February. Thank you.